So what can I say about Chuck before he gets up here to speak? You know, it says Chuck was raised in Kansas and has been married to Jody, and he told me he's been married for 53 years. So together they've raised 4 children, have 10 grandchildren. He's worked in Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. He's done both domestic and foreign missions in various places and written many different articles and bulletins and publications and done a lot of great work for the church. He has also served as instructor for various schools in the biblical studies since 1988. I'd like to welcome Chuck.
"50 years ago, I entered into the Preston Road School of Preaching down in Dallas, Texas, under the oversight of Brother Eldred Stevens. And it was probably just about this time, 50 years ago, I preached my first gospel sermon. Now, Jack would say, well, you're getting a little bit better, but there's a lot of improvement needed." And John obviously says it too. But, now, 50 years ago, the first gospel sermon that we were assigned was 3 minutes long. And I thought it was an eternity. And now I'm given 40 minutes, and I'm thinking, at the end of this 40 minutes, I won't be done exhorting you ladies. If you will, open your Bibles to Proverbs, the 31st chapter. We'll be looking at verses 10 through verse 31, 10 through 31. Now, Proverbs, the 31st chapter, is the record of the words of Lemuel, or Lemuel, I guess the way it's really properly pronounced. Well, within this chapter, Lemuel's mother instructed him concerning the role of kings, verses 1 through 9, and then also the role of ladies in the virtuous woman in verses 10 through 31. Now, please make note that this is actually Lemuel's mother. It's the instructions that he received from his mother. Now, that really comes down to Lemuel's mother taught Lemuel, and Lemuel taught me, and now I'm instructing you. But whose words are the instructions? Well, it's Lemuel's mother. And so it's a lady then teaching ladies, but interestingly, through men. Now, nothing really is known for sure about Lemuel. There are some that believe that Lemuel is another name for Solomon. The name actually means belonging to God. And so a lot of people believe that it was a name given to Solomon, and Strong's dictionary actually notes that. And so maybe it's another name for him, possibly a symbolic name. Now, if that be the case, then who would be Lemuel's mother? Bathsheba. And so these could be the words of Bathsheba. We don't know, but that's a possibility at least. Others believe that Lemuel was looking for a wife, and so his mother then gave him this instruction concerning virtuous women. However, when you look at the text, it appears to me that this lady's already married. It's not talking about someone who's getting ready to get married, or for a husband who's looking for a lady. I mean, would you be looking for a lady that's already married? Well, I hope not, but nonetheless, that's how some people think about it. But either way, Lemuel is passing down his mother's instruction, his mother's advice for future generations. Now, Lemuel wrote his mother's instruction in the form of an alphabetic acrostic. Now, Brother Joseph, this morning or this afternoon, he had a little bit of I don't remember who it was, but somebody, Brother Rao, he had an acrostic. It was the word, I don't remember what the word was now. I do remember some of the points, but nonetheless, An alphabetic acrostic is to take each letter of the alphabet, and in English it'd be A, B, C, D, and the A would equal, apple, and B would equal something else, and et cetera, et cetera. Now in the Hebrew, they don't have 26 letters, they only have 22 letters. Now I've never studied the Hebrew, and I don't really understand it completely, but you have 22 verses, and each verse is a consecutive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so it goes right straight through it. Now, alphabetic acrostics are found throughout the poetic words. You find actually several alphabetic acrostics in the book of Psalms. Probably the most noted is Psalm 119. If you don't know it, it's kind of an interesting study. The book of Lamentations is a book of alphabetic acrostics. And if you look at each chapter, 4 of the chapters are 22 verses long. The center chapter, chapter 3, is 66 verses. And so it's 3 verses per letter in that particular book. But it's an alphabetic acrostic, and it's an easy way to memorize or to remember different things. And that's what Lemuel wrote down for you ladies. Well, here about 4 years ago, Jack assigned this same topic to me, and I said, when he assigned Proverbs 31, I said, I did this 4 years ago, and he said, you might get it right this time. No, he didn't. But he says, well, just do it again. Well, I'm not going to do the same thing. Last time I actually did an acrostic as well, and I did I think it was 5 points or something like that of an acrostic for you ladies. But this year, I thought really at first I would do 22 points. And I thought, really? You're going to get through 22 points? And decided to cut it down to 10. Now, if I get through 10, that'll be very fortunate, but nonetheless, that's what we're going to shoot at. Now, in her advice to Lemuel, he answered 3 basic questions. He answered the question of what is a virtuous woman, and then he pointed out some characteristics of a virtuous woman, and then the value of a virtuous woman. And that's what we want to look at and consider this evening. But we're going to look at the characteristics, and we're going to look at 10 characteristics of a virtuous woman. The first characteristic that we find in the first 3 verses of this particular text, verses 10 through verse number 12, is that she is trustworthy. Now we're going to read the text and then make some comments about that. He said, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. So Lemuel then began with the value of a virtuous woman. And really, when you look at that idea that her value is far above rubies, and those of us that have virtuous women around us and near us, we know that her value is much more than that. I think several years ago, Jody said I should write her a check for the number of hours that she works in a week. Well, there's no way I could have done that. And besides that, if I had said you were worth $10 an hour, which was a good wage back then, she would say I was worth $15 an hour. And no matter what I said, and really the value is far above rubies. And her value is far above rubies. There's no way that I could pay her for what she does. But when you look at that concept, is he talking about the number of rubies? I mean, after all, he uses the idea of a plural. I mean, all the gems is not worth her value, or no matter how precious the singular gem might be, it is not worth her value. Her value is much greater than that. Now, verse 11 indicates that the virtuous woman applied the principles of submission. That is, submission toward her husband. He entrusts her with good stewardship by the things that he provided for her and for the family. And because of her trustworthiness, he does not need to go elsewhere because there is no lack of gain. In other words, she doesn't squander away the things that he provides. She takes care of it, and she then uses it well. And notice her efforts were for the good of her husband at the very end. And it wasn't for a brief moment of her life or even an extended portion of her life, but it says all the days of her life. So she was trustworthy, and her efforts were good all the days of her life. Now, the second word that I chose for the virtuous woman is that she is industrious. Now, this is a longer section, but it's verses 13 to 19, and actually he comes back and touches this again later on, but we're going to use different words. But in verses 13 to 19, it says, she seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like merchant ship. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and portion to her maids. She considereth a field, and buyeth it with the fruit of her hands, and she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and to strengthen her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out at night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. Now, there's an old saying that people use, and I've used it with reference to preachers, from dawn to set of sun, a preacher's work is never done. Now, originally I heard that with the reference to a woman. Well, you read those verses, he talks about her getting up early in the morning and going to bed late at night in order to accomplish all the work that she does. So from dawn to set of sun, truly her work is never done. Now, there are 7 qualities that we find within this particular text that shows that she's industrious. In verse number 13, she seeketh and works well, and which indicates that she's not lazy. She purchased raw materials in order to make clothes, and that indicates that she's a person that's busy doing things, not just simply sitting around watching TV or doing nothing. But in verse 14, she brings food from afar. She then is able to provide or do that which is necessary to provide for her family. So she goes out and she purchases the food for her family and the good things for her family. Then verse number 15, she prepares food early in the morning, demonstrating she's earnest in preparing that food and providing a meal for her family. And she best uses her time best or wisely for her family. Verse 16, she purchases a field, she plants it, knowing and is willing to do all that's necessary in order for her family to be sustained by the fruits of the field. Then verse 17, she girds herself with strength, and that simply is the mindset of endurance. And sometimes, let's face the facts, we have to all endure. And sometimes godly women and virtuous women must endure. And then she has the proper attitude concerning her merchandise, and she's willing to do what it takes in order for her to make a good product, which seems to work out well, and she works into the night in order to make sure that she has a good product. That's verse 18. And then verse 19, she with other women and do the work of women in handling the yarn. And so really, when you look at all those different things, it all goes back to she's a woman of industry. She's industrious in the things that she does. But then verse 20 shows that she's helpful. Look at verse 20. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. Now the emphasis is upon her hand or her hands. If you look at the verse, there's a singular and a plural there, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. But what does a hand represent? The hand represents all the way through Scriptures. It represents labor. That's what we do with our hands. We work with our hands. And a lady then, a virtuous woman, works with her hands in order to provide for those that are in need. And she then she was like Dorcas in Acts the 9th chapter and verse 36, who was full of good works and alms deeds which she did. Now notice that in the first part of the verse, she worked with her hand, singular. She stretched out her hand to the poor, singular. But then he said, she stretched out her hands to the needy. So in other words, she made efforts with one hand, but then to help even more, she would make efforts with two hands. But the hands represent her labor. So she doubled her labors in order to take care of it. Now the first was to the poor, the second to the needy, and we think to ourselves, what isn't that parallel? Well, they are parallel, but it's actually two different words that are used there, and the second word actually has reference to an afflicted person, a poor person who's afflicted various ways. But then we find that the virtuous woman is foresighted. Look at verse 21. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. Well, why does she not fear? Because she has a job to do. She loves her family. She has a greater responsibility to her family, and she doesn't let fear get in the way. You know, the fact is, too many people allow fear to get in the way. They never really accomplish anything because they're afraid. Well, the virtuous woman is not that kind of person. She is bold and she's brave and she does what's necessary. She faces the snow and she takes care of the things that her family needs. And her love for her family is greater than her fear for the weather. But then the latter part of it says, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. Now what in the world does scarlet have? I mean, scarlet normally is simply a color, or color of red. And what does that have to do with this virtuous woman? Well, scarlet here could be a reference to one or two things, maybe both, I don't know. But it can be reference to the fact that she's willing to pay the price for a garment, an expensive garment, that will keep her family warm. Well, that makes a lot of sense. There are other commentaries that believe that it's talking about a double thickness of a garment. And the scarlet actually has reference to the thickness of the garment. And, you know, you guys that live up here in the north, now, you know, Oklahoma, we have a little bit of weather. But I remember when we came back from Ukraine and they were complaining how cold it was. And I said, you know, this is not cold. I mean, this is nothing like being cold. Well, those of us that live in the north or have lived in the north, we know what cold is. And you know, it takes a warm garment to keep a person warm. And she's willing to do what it takes in order to keep her family warm. But then she's also physically adorning. Look at verse number 22. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Now, any good man knows that the beauty of women is more than just simply what's on the outside. Now, I mean, you know, when you're a teenager and you're 20 years old, for us guys, you know, we're looking for a beautiful lady. But, you know, the fact is, we know that it's not going to be that way for all times. Now, the old saying is that the woman marries the guy thinking that he can change her, and he's so stubborn he won't change. But the guy marries the woman thinking that she's not going to change, and she grows older, and she does change. Well, you know, now, I would never do this to my wife, but I remember, I mean, we were just married. It wasn't very long after that. And this fellow, we were at a get-together with the church and, you know, young couples, and this fella sang to his wife, "The old gray mare is not what she used to be." I'm not sure that's wise. You know, I mean, you know, the reality is that she's not what she used to be, but, I mean, we don't have to point it out. I mean, the obvious is the obvious. The fact is, we all change. But the value is not in the outward beauty. The value is the inside. And he recognizes that a virtuous woman is more than just that. So she dresses in a way that's becoming, and she avoids extremes. I mean, the extreme is, and we all know people that do this, women that do this. I mean, one extreme is that they lavishly clothe themselves and have all the rings and all the jewelry and all those kind of things. And Paul warned about that over in 1 Timothy chapter 2, and Peter also warned about it in 1 Peter chapter 3. So we're not talking about that. But the other extreme is that she pays no attention to the outside. But the virtuous woman is somewhere in between there. She's concerned with her looks, but not overly concerned with it. And neither extreme is sought by her. The next word that I chose is the word honor. She brings honor. Look at verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates, and when he sitteth among the elders of the land. Now, within any city of the ancient world, especially in Judah and Israel and those kind of areas, the city gates was a place of judgment. And the elders of the city would go to those different places. And you remember in the book of Job, he talked about those kind of things. And Job would be at the gate, and they would make decisions. The older gentlemen, the elders of the city, would make decisions and make judgments. Well, she works in such a way that she brings honor to him. And that the honor spoken of in this passage is in reference to her husband. Because of her submissiveness, she advances her husband's interest rather than her own. And therefore, as a loving wife, she then brings respect and honor to her husband. Now, I really intend for this lesson to be more exhortation or encouragement to be virtuous women for you ladies, but sometimes exhortations that need to be thought about too. I mean, I can think of different times in my life as a preacher when there were ladies' classes and the ladies would get together and it was nothing more than bash your husband together. That's not the way godly women do. That's not the way virtuous women do. They uphold and encourage their husband, and they do those things that are necessary in order to encourage them. It's not a husband bashing time. I remember one time in one congregation where I worked, a lady, her and her husband moved into the congregation, and the next thing I know, they're creating a bunch of strife and division within the congregation, and she decides to have a Bible class, a ladies' Bible class on Sunday morning, which nobody really had a problem with that, except she couldn't find a good Bible class teacher. So you know what she did? She got a high school girl to be the Bible class, the ladies' Bible class teacher. But you know what the class was really about? Bashing the elders, bashing the preacher, bashing their husband, and etc. That's not what godly ladies do. And brethren or sisters, if that's what you're doing, quit. Repent. It's just that simple. Stop doing it. Be a godly lady. Be a virtuous woman. And be the kind of woman that God expects you to be. It is important that you do that. And so, as a loving wife, she then brings respect and honor to her husband. Then she works hard. Look at verse 24. She maketh fine linen, and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchants. Well, the virtuous woman goes beyond what's necessary. She makes, sells, and delivers the fine linens. So she does well more than what's necessary. Now, the type of girdle that she makes is made of silk. Now, it's not like you know, you ladies know this more than I do, but you know, back in the 60s and the 70s, ladies wore girdles. Well, this is not what this is talking about. It's something altogether different than that. It was made of silk and highly ornamental. And based upon what was previously described, the purpose of it was to supply her family. She made these girdles, some type of wrap around a lady's waist, and she made them in order to supply her family. Now, what kind of thing would that have been? Probably, like I said, something that would wrap around the waist, or maybe even a shoulder type thing. But nonetheless, that was more ornamental than it was anything else. But then the godly woman or the virtuous woman is spiritually adorning. Look at verses 25 and 26. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. Now, her concern goes beyond the physical things of this world. Her interest is not the outward clothing so much as opposed to the things that she wears as far as those godly virtues are concerned. Now, just recently I did a little lesson we have a monthly thing for the youth, and we invite other congregations to meet with us and those kind of things, and it happened to be my turn to do the lesson, and I took it from the book of Colossians. And Paul exhorted the brethren there to put off, that is, old clothing, and then he listed some things, and then he exhorted them to put on, and those were some virtuous things. And then he also exhorted them, although he didn't use the word put, but it's put in. That's how I did it. And so we have different things that are within us. Well, the godly woman, she's more concerned with the spiritual things rather than the physical things. And so it's interesting how he made mention of this at the beginning. Strength and honor are her clothing. Now, the strength and the honor there is, well, the strength in this passage would be her godly strength, her moral might, if you want to put it that way, and her honor would be her dignity. That's important to her. She demonstrates it by the character that she has. And she has wisdom which stems from God, and not wisdom which stems from this world. You know, there's two choices. And James actually talks about that. He contrasts wisdom of the world as opposed to wisdom from God. But this godly woman, this virtuous woman, she's concerned about wisdom from God. She's not as much concerned with the other. And so she controls her tongue and speaks kindness. And she's not an idle talker. She's not a gossip. She's not a slanderer. It is quite the opposite of what Peter described or what Paul described later on. But then we also find that she's caring. Look at verse number 27. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and she eateth not the bread of idleness. Now, this is really a repeat of some of the things that he said previously to this, but she sees to the need of her family. She makes sure that she stays busy in order for her to care for her family. And she knows the needs. And again, the need is more than just those physical needs or those mental needs. Sometimes we think about, as far as our kids are concerned, that we have a responsibility to take care of the physical things. So we provide, as men, we provide the household, and we provide paying the bills and all those kind of things. But, you know, the godly woman, she thinks a little further than that. She thinks about the mental ideas, but even more important than that, she thinks about the spiritual things. I mean, brethren, that's what's going to be eternal. It's not the physical and the mental, but it's the spiritual things. So what does she do? If she's thinking about spiritual things, what is she going to do? I don't know how she could help but want to tell Bible stories and teach Bible lessons to her children. That's what she does. She's interested in spiritual things, so she teaches spiritual things. She does more than just simply teach them ABCs and 1, 2, 3. And notice the idle hands lead to wandering from house to house, and those that do so are tattlers and busybodies and speak things they ought not, that Paul noted in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 13. But then the last thing, and I put all these verses together. I believe there's 3 of them there, 28, 29, 30, and 31. I guess there's 4. But anyway, it really describes her as being devout. Look at verses 28 and following. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor and deceit and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gate. Well, verse 29 is the ways that her husband and her children praise her. Now, a virtuous woman is somebody that needs to be praised, and we want to praise. Well, why would not children praise her and her husband praise her if she's a virtuous woman? Well, we do those kind of things because she is the virtuous woman. In verse 30 is the writer's comment and is basis from which the virtue stems. So look at verse 20 or verse 30 again. He said, favor is deceitful, beauty is vain. Now that's talking about the outside things. Deceitful and vain are things that are empty, that doesn't have any real value. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. You know, when you look at all those virtues that she has, it has to all go back to this. She wants to do what God wants her to be. She wants to be what God wants her to be. And so she is praised because of that reason. The greatest characteristic that she possesses is that she fears the Lord, showing that she wants to do what her purpose in life is. And the foundation of all the other virtues stem right back to this one thing. She considers the physical things vain, empty, vanity in respect to the spiritual things. And she realizes the things which really count in this world are not the things of this world. You know, our generation, sad to say, has got that all mixed up. You know, we think in terms of, well, like the one fellow that Jody used to babysit for, he had a bumper sticker, the man with the most toys wins. No, it's not the truth. Don't let anybody tell you that. It's simply not the truth. And yet people live for things. And things are so, in the end, so valueless. I think about when my mother passed away, and then later my dad. You know what we did? Us kids, there's 4 of us, we went through their house and invited some grandkids and nieces and nephews to help out with this, but the kids did it first. Went through their house and picked out a few things that we wanted. But most everything was just left. I mean, that's the way it works. You know, the things of this world isn't nearly as important. And it's not like the pagans. We're not like the pagans. I mean, the pagans think that they can take it to heaven. And so I remember visiting a cemetery down in Oklahoma. And this particular cemetery was connected with a pagan tribe of what we call American Indians. And they would have these beer cans sitting on their tombstones as if they could do something with it. You know, the fact is, we can't take it with us. You know, like Brother Ted Thrasher used to put in his bulletin, a bale of hay and $1 million in a bale of hay will be worth the same on Judgment Day. Got to get the rhyme in there right. But you know, that's the reality. I mean, whether you have $1 million or a bale of hay, it's still worth the same on Judgment Day. It's absolutely valueless. Well, the virtuous woman, that's not what she lives for. She doesn't live for the things of this world. She doesn't live for all the jewels and all the pretty clothes and all the big houses and the expensive cars and the new boat and the new whatever else that she might want. That's not what virtuous women live for. They live in fear of God. They live in such a way that they have total respect for God Almighty. Her reverence is active, it works, and these works praise her in a public way. Lemuel's advice answered 3 basic questions. What is a virtuous woman? Or what is a virtuous woman? She is a woman of valor, of force. That's what the word means. And really, when you look at that, the old saying, the person that rocks the cradle rules the world, that's how her value is. That's the strength that she has. And what are the characteristics of a virtuous woman? She's trustworthy, she's industrious, she's helpful, she's foresighted, she's physically adorning, she brings honor, she works hard, she is spiritually adorning, she's caring, and she's devout. But in the end, what is the value of a virtuous woman? Her price is far above rubies. You can't buy a virtuous woman. Her price is far above that. And aren't we thankful for virtuous women? Thank you very much. And really, I'm not done with you ladies.